and start that, and you will be prompted to accept. Okay. So I will just take a step back here. So thanks everyone again for joining. Here's our agenda for this evening. We will be providing a high-level overview of the draft plan, draft ordinance, and the accompanying story map. We will also outline the different ways that we are collecting public comments. And as a reminder, this meeting will be recorded. Pat, do you have any opening remarks for this?
Yes, good evening. My name is Pat Hachia. I'm from Los Angeles County Planning. And with me tonight are a number of presenters from our side of the team, LA County, as well as our Danielle and Marina, who are representing DUDEC, who is part of our consulting team. So you'll be hearing from a number of the members from our team tonight on the presentation. So thank you for being here, and we hope you'll have lots of questions and comments for us to help us move this project in a direction that will be beneficial for everybody. Thank you.
Thanks, Pat. Next slide, Josh. Okay. So here's the schedule of the project. The draft plan is currently out for public review. The plan was released for public comment on October 30th of this year, and the comment period has been extended per request, so you have until January 16th to provide feedback. We will explain the ways that you can comment later on in this presentation. We've conducted two rounds of...
Danielle, sorry to cut you off. This is Thomas. I just spoke with Marina, and she's not able to get in the Spanish translation. So can we get that fixed before we continue, please?
Yes, absolutely.
Thanks.
Let's see if I can unmute her quickly. Hi, Marina, you should be unmuted there. Oh, I can't hear your audio.
Is she in the Spanish channel?
She's in the Spanish channel now. I just checked.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so are you able to get into the Spanish channel?
She's in there now, so that's why we
perfect.
can't hear her in the English one. As long
Great,
as
thank you so much, and thanks, Thomas, for letting us know. And just a reminder to everybody, if you're able to put yourself on mute. Thanks so much. Okay, so turning back to the project schedule here. We have conducted 2 rounds of public outreach to date through the visioning and plan and preparation process, including a series of online and in-person workshops. We have held 35 events to date. I just want to check with everybody. Is everyone also hearing the Spanish language at the same time that I'm speaking?
No.
No, but if you have to, if you're in the original audio.
Tahira or Rich, it looks like you just came off mute.
No, I only hear you right now.
So Marina, I can hear you speaking at the exact same time that I'm speaking. Is that how this is supposed to work?
Danielle, you should be in the English channel.
Yes.
Okay. We will proceed then. Sorry about that. Okay. So sorry, everyone, turning back to the project schedule. This is an important time to provide your feedback, having the benefit of the entire plan and supporting documents for your review. We welcome the feedback and we look forward to hearing from you. Moving into the new year, after we collect and reflect the public comments, we are looking to go to the Regional Planning Commission in April, a board hearing in July, and go for final adoption in October 2023. Next slide, please, Josh. Here we will go into a bit more detail about how to comment on the plan, but at a high level, we will give you a few different ways sorry, the notes on this slide were, there was a typo here. So here are the opportunities to comment. You can click the link provided in this presentation. All of this information is also on the project website. And we invite you to email comments to metroareaplan at planning.lacounty.gov. And there are also physical hard copies of the plan for your review at the following library locations: East Los Angeles Library, East Rancho Dominguez Library, Florence Express Library, Huntington Library, Woodcrest Library, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Library, Willowbrook Library, and City Terrace Library. And thanks, Thomas, for including that link in the chat. Next slide, please, Josh. Now we will begin with an overview of the draft plan. This is really intended to be an at a glance of what the sections of the plan look like. Next slide, please, Josh. So here's the table of contents. Chapter 1 is the introduction. Chapter 2 is From Roots to Real Time, a brief history of the metro area planning area. Chapter 3, the area-wide goals and policies. Chapter 4, community-specific goals and policies. Chapter 5, implementation, and a series of appendices. Appendix A, which provides a summary of the public engagement. Appendix B, which is the historic context statement. Appendix C, the community profiles and existing conditions. Appendix D, market and real estate study. And Appendix E, mobility and parking study. Next slide. The introduction slide includes the following sections. We include an overview, organization of the plan, and how to use the plan. As you know, the plan will influence decisions made over the planning horizon for the next 15 years or so. It will help guide the county's long-range planning, inform stakeholders of the plans to come, and ensure accountability in achieving these goals. The purpose of this plan. The area plan will serve as the primary planning document for the metro area, consolidating older planning documents. In relationship to the general plan, the county adopted a planning areas framework in 2015 as part of the general plan. The metro area plan is one of 11 planning frameworks. From here, the county can develop area plans that are tailored to each planning area. All area plans are components of and must be consistent with the general plan goals and policies. General plan guiding principles as they relate to the metro area plan. The area plan adds an additional guiding principle, promotes strengths, community voice, and equity outcomes. It will seek out special places or traditions that are significant to the community and recommend ways to preserve and celebrate them. It also includes community outreach and summarizes the outreach efforts to date for each community. And we also touch on inequality and provide a brief context and recognition of the discriminatory planning practices that have impacted the planning area communities to present day. In addition, Chapter 1 includes the 5 big ideas. Next slide. So as we've discussed earlier, the 5 big ideas will help achieve the community's visions. The first big idea is cleaner industrial. 4 area plan communities currently allow industrial uses: West Rancho Dominguez, East Los Angeles, Willowbrook, and Florence Firestone. Industrial parcels in these communities provide jobs and economic development opportunities, but some also pollute or generally not seen as clean neighbors to residents and businesses. The area plan aims to recognize growing trends in traditional uses and increase opportunities for small urban manufacturers and the life sciences and technology industrial uses. The second big idea is ACUs. Through our community outreach and research, we noticed the prevalence of informal neighborhood services within the metro area plan communities and the important role they played in community in encouraging small businesses and providing access to necessary community services. Allowing ACUs on corner lots would formalize existing patterns of uses and provide all residents with access to at-hand commercial services and some residents with opportunities for establishing small businesses and additional family income. The third big idea is mobile food facilities. We recognize that taco trucks and, generally speaking, mobile food vending options are a defining aspect of these communities. As such, we want to provide a more streamlined framework that encourages existing and future entrepreneurs to formalize their businesses within the county. The fourth big idea is the freeway cap parks. In an attempt to reduce issues caused by close proximity to freeways, the plan establishes goals and policies to identify and test the feasibility for future freeway cap parks. And the fifth big idea is to prioritize housing stability. The county is in the midst of implementing its recently adopted housing element that outlines how and where the county will be creating more opportunities for housing. Through this effort, the county will be looking to rezone parcels throughout the county to help accommodate the growing community. These concepts are highlighted via the goals and policies in chapter 3 and 4, and then you will see the ideas translated into actionable, implementable programs in chapter 5. Next slide. So while the introduction really provides a framework for the area plan, chapter 2 provides the foundation for the rest of the document. One of the goals of the plans is to create a digestible, easy to read plan, and chapter 2 really lays the groundwork for this. Chapter 2 includes some of the fast facts on the metro area as a whole, and then provides some quick facts on each of the different communities. These profiles set the stage for the goals and policies and also the programs that are included in the following chapters. As shown on the slide, this is an example of what a fast facts spread looks like. We include the population, median income, how many people rent or own, and even a quick overview of how each community got its name, among other relevant information. Next slide. The other component to chapter 2 is a brief historic timeline of major happenings that have led up to current day. If you're interested in a detailed history of a given community, Appendix B, the historic context statement, provides a much deeper dive. Next slide. Chapter 3 outlines the shared goals and policies across all 7 communities. Though each of the communities are inherently distinct and have a rich backgrounds that have shaped who they are today, there are several areas that overlap that can benefit from the communities collectively. This chapter is not meant to be reviewed in tandem with chapter 4 before a full overview of the recommended goals and policies of each community. This chapter is organized into 6 sections. The first, land use. The second section is public health, wellness, and environmental justice, followed by mobility, economic development, safety and climate resilience, and historic preservation. Next slide. So here's a sample of the goals and policies included in the plan. As you're reviewing the document, perhaps it's worth mentioning that the goals identify the physical, economic, and social outcomes that the community wishes to achieve. Policies state the desired outcomes and establish a course of action for decision makers to accomplish the community's desired vision.
9 times 5 is 45, right?
Next slide.
I'm sorry, can I pause? Could you please mute yourselves,
Then
everybody?
we move into chapter 4, which is the community-specific goals and policies. Each community is color-coded in the plan to correspond to the map on the right side of this slide. Communities are listed in alphabetical order, starting with East Los Angeles. Next slide. And here are just, the other 3 communities. Next slide. And here are a few examples of the goals and policies that you will see throughout the document. Next slide. And finally, we turn to chapter 5, which is the implementation program. This chapter includes a list of key programs and tasks that continue to and will implement policies presented in chapter 3 and 4. So the programs are divided into 2 categories: new programs and existing county programs. The area plan programs outlined here are designed to address the overall policy objectives identified in the area plan. Each program identifies lead and partner agencies, however, they are not exclusive, and new partners can be added as needed. The program also includes a time frame for completion. Of the new programs, I will provide a general overview of the included programs. Freeway caps. This is to develop and implement a freeway capping feasibility framework for the metro area plan communities that have been subject to long-term negative effects of freeway construction and operation. Focused intensive historic resources surveys. This is to streamline the nomination process by preparing historic context statements and intensive level historic resource surveys. The Metro Area Plan Historic Surveys. This prepares historic context statements and reconnaissance level surveys for the Metro Area Plan communities, starting with East Los Angeles, followed by the remaining communities of East Rancho Dominguez, Walnut Park, West Athens Westmont, West Rancho Dominguez Victoria, and Willowbrook. Model survey and research efforts after the Florence Firestone Historic Survey. The next program is the interpretation plan for commercial corridors. This will identify character defining features and stories or accounts of past events relative to the following commercial corridors. It will develop interpretation plans for each community that highlight their history and unique physical features. Commercial Corridor Legacy Business Retention Program is the next new program. This will develop a legacy business retention program for legacy businesses over 50 years old along commercial corridors in order to prevent displacement. Another program is the Community Benefits Program. This will develop and implement a community benefits program for projects within the Metro Area Plan based on and expanding upon the Los Angeles County Development Authority's existing community benefits policy. The next program is Accessory Commercial Units, also known as ACUs. This will encourage the development of a zoning ordinance, technical assistance, and financial incentive programs to assist in the development of ACUs. And then lastly, we have mobile food vending. This program will facilitate zoning ordinance, technical assistance, financial programs, and incentives to support the expansion of food vending services. In addition to these new programs, there are many more existing programs which we are not discussing in today's presentation, but we do encourage you to look through those during a separate review. Next slide, please. And with that, I will hand it over to the county.
All right. Thank you, Danielle. So good evening, everyone. My name is Tahira Ferris, and I am with LA County Planning. I'll be discussing our zoning ordinance that includes permitting regulations and development standards for the metro area plan, and it will apply to all communities within the metro area. The new regulations will be incorporated into Title 22, which is the county's zoning code. So one of the topics discussed earlier was the issue of incompatible land uses, particularly industrial uses that are near residential and other sensitive uses. So to deal with the long-standing challenges resulting from this incompatibility, the metro area plan is introducing 2 new zones intended to be clean manufacturing zones. And those new zones will each have specific regulations and development standards in the zoning code. The first new zone is called Artisan Production and Custom Manufacturing Zone, or M0.5. And the other zone is the Life Science Park Zone, or LSP. These zones will have specific purposes, a limited scope, and they are intended to encourage a transition to cleaner uses from some of the past historically impactful industrial uses. So I'll explain what each of these zones entails on the next couple of slides. If you are familiar with our Green Zones program that was recently adopted, which targets industrial uses that are in close proximity to sensitive uses, the new zones as part of the metro area plan will add another layer to address these past challenges that the Green Zones program began to address. So in addition to regulating existing industrial uses and putting stricter regulations on them or prohibiting certain uses, we also want to encourage newer uses that will promote cleaner activities and overall healthier communities. We also have proposed new uses that Danielle mentioned, accessory commercial units, and also shared kitchen complexes. And I will also discuss those in the following slides. And then finally, we've reorganized our existing community standards districts within the metro area to streamline standards where possible, remove any outdated or inconsistent regulations, and create a metro planning area standards district with the existing community standards districts as subsections underneath. We've also incorporated all of the permitting regulations and development standards from our existing Willowbrook specific plan and our Connect Southwest specific plan into the zoning code in Title 22. Currently, those 2 specific plans are documents that live outside of our zoning code. There's a hyperlink to those documents within Title 22. And so for the ease of implementation and consistency and clarity, all of the text that includes the regulations from those specific plans will be centralized within the zoning code. And then finally, we also have cleaned up any inconsistencies, any outdated standards where appropriate within those specific plans, as well as the East Los Angeles 3rd Street specific plan. And we've made sure that any new regulations that we've proposed as part of the Metro Planning Area Standards District will be included in all of the specific plans as well. Next slide, please. So currently the county has various manufacturing and industrial zones, ranging from light to heavy manufacturing, as well as an aircraft and heavy industrial zone and a manufacturing planned development zone. The current light manufacturing zone, which is M-1, allows for a variety of uses. And in many cases, those uses are not always compatible with the nearby communities because they were not necessarily intended to be in close proximity to sensitive uses. So our first proposed new zone is the Artisan Production Custom Manufacturing, again, M0.5. This zone will allow for neighborhood scale urban manufacturing uses or products that are crafted or assembled by hand, including production, design, distribution, repair of products such as furniture, art, jewelry, software, technology, and other custom-made or innovative products. The zone will also allow for some neighborhoods serving commercial and basic services and innovative uses that are compatible with the surrounding or abutting residential zones. So the M0.5 zone is intended to support the creation of transitions between employment and residential uses and really encourage less impactful, less noxious uses adjacent to residential zones and other sensitive uses. The M0.5 zone encourages land use compatibility and a healthier environment where a variety of businesses and residents can coexist. And finally, the zone will also help serve as a buffer between some of the heavier industrial zones and some of the nearby residential areas. The new M0.5 zone will be mapped in the communities of East Los Angeles, Florence Firestone, West Rancho Dominguez, and Willowbrook. Next slide, please. So the other new zone that we're proposing is the Life Science Park, or LSP zone. And this zone is intended to provide employment opportunities and support emerging technology, entrepreneurship, and innovation. The types of uses that will be permitted will include life sciences, research and development, and especially those that support bioscience and biomedical product development and manufacturing. This zone will also allow for administrative and professional offices to support the nearby manufacturing and research uses. And in addition, we will also allow for basic neighborhood services, including grocery stores and childcare and other needed services for the employees and the residents in the nearby communities. This zone will also help serve as a buffer between the heavier industrial zones and some of the nearby residential areas. And the LSP zone will be mapped in the communities of East Los Angeles and Willowbrook. Next slide, please. So in addition to the new zones, I mentioned that we have a couple of new uses that we're proposing. The accessory commercial units, which will only be permitted on corner lots in residential zones. And this is a policy that will allow for more economic opportunities within communities, but also provide basic needed services to residents, so they don't have to leave the neighborhood for basic services. So think of a corner market where you can get some essentials, fresh produce, last minute items, and an ACU will need to be on a parcel that has a residence, and it has to be subordinate to that residential use. So the residence would still be the primary use on those parcels. The ACU can be attached or detached from the residence, and there will be specific development standards to address things like setbacks, lighting, signage, and hours of operation. And alcohol sales will be prohibited with ACUs. The other new use that we are including is shared kitchen complexes. And this is another idea to promote entrepreneurship and small businesses, and also increase economic activity within the metro area communities. So the shared kitchen complexes will be permitted in commercial and industrial zones, and they are somewhat similar to catering services. But these facilities will allow small business owners, people starting out without kitchen space, to be able to rent space, which is definitely cheaper than having to lease out an entire building or develop a space from the ground up. And multiple individuals or small businesses can rent out kitchens within the complex. They would prepare food to be sold offsite, whether at local restaurants or stores or bakeries or wherever. So you can think of this as kind of a step up from a home-based kitchen. It allows someone to continue to build their business and expand upon that small business. Next slide, please. So currently, we also have what's called community standards districts in our zoning code, and those are supplemental districts that have locally focused policies and specific regulations and development standards for certain communities. The purpose of those is to encourage development and new land uses that are compatible with the surrounding community, including the physical, environmental, economic characteristics that might be unique to that community. Within the metro area, we currently have 7 different community standards districts. So all of the communities do have very unique characteristics, but they also do share some overarching themes in terms of the existing development pattern, demographics, and resources. So what we have done is we've developed a planning area standards district to streamline development standards so that the standards are similar across communities, and we don't need to look in multiple places to see what regulations apply to one community. So the planning area standards district, again, is an umbrella. And underneath that, we still will have some community-specific regulations, which people will be more familiar with the community standards districts. So some of the common regulations across the planning area standards district include requiring a conditional use permit for all schools in commercial and mixed use zones. This was based on feedback from some of our community representatives. We will also be requiring a conditional use permit for drive-throughs and gas stations. And a conditional use permit is a discretionary review process that requires noticing to nearby property owners, as well as a public hearing. We also discussed allowing new uses, including accessory commercial units and shared kitchen complexes. And in addition, we actually are creating a pathway to legalize other existing non-conforming markets and commercial uses in residential zones. So again, things like neighborhood markets that are currently woven into communities and have been existing for many, many years. Some of these businesses may not meet our criteria for an accessory commercial unit. They may be standalone commercial businesses, not on a parcel with a residence, and they may not be on a corner lot, but maybe in the middle of the block or on an alley. In that case, we also want to provide opportunities for those businesses to continue to operate. Currently, they have to go through a non-conforming review process, which is similar to a conditional use permit, requires a public hearing, and there are term limits that have to be renewed every so many years. So we want to create a simpler process for them to be established and continue to operate without having to go through those hurdles every time. With those businesses that are existing that we create a pathway to legalize, we would have some criteria that one, particularly that they do not sell alcohol. If any businesses do sell alcohol, they would still have to go through our regular permitting requirements for alcohol conditional use permit. We also will have development standards for residential, commercial, and industrial zones across the planning area standards district, and those will be consistent for the 7 communities. And then again, if there are specific situations or needs within any one of those communities that is different from the others, then there may be additional regulations to address the specific needs of that community. So that concludes my presentation on our ordinance components. And I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Rich Marshallian, to share about our story map.
Next, oh, there. Thank you, Tahira. Hello, everyone. My name is Rich Marshallian. I wanted to briefly go over the story map tool that was provided to the public and share with you how you can access the tool and use the information contained within. The presentation slide in front of you contains links to both the English and Spanish version of the story map, as well as links to guides for understanding the story map in the respective languages. These direct links can be found on our project page, which I will share right now. So they can be found on our project page on the Documents and Recordings tab that Thomas was kind enough to share a link to earlier in the meeting. But if you click on the Documents and Recording page, you'll see a link to the story map, both in English and Spanish, as well as the guides that are posted to help people understand how to use the story map. Sorry, it's blocking the link I need. Okay, once you click on the story map, sorry. So the story map includes a brief overview of the project and begins with a simple map showing the boundaries of the metro area plan with their respective unincorporated communities and areas highlighted in tan. You can focus on a specific community by clicking a link on your screen. and at which point it will zoom in on that community, selecting the community area itself will give you display some basic demographic information about the community that is contained in the area plan documents. And you can freely kind of look around and get information about the different communities here. As you scroll down in the story map, you'll hit kind of the first section, which will share some of the goals and policies of the metro area plan and give a summary of the 6 general plan guiding principles that serve as a foundation for this project. Next, the story map lists and shares information about the big ideas that were included as part of the project. Our first is dealing with cleaner industrial uses. On your screen will be a map of the mapped industrial zones that are being proposed to be changed in order to implement the policy goal of having cleaner industrial uses. The map will show you the 2 industrial uses, the life science park zone and the artisan production and custom and manufacturing zone, shown in blue and green respectively. At any point, you can click on a change area and the change being proposed and get an idea of the scope of the change. Areas that don't have a color in this section don't have any proposed changes in conjunction with changes to industrial zones. The rest of the ideas will be listed with a brief description, including for ACUs, mobile food vendors, freeway cap parks, and housing stability. The next large section will focus on land use and will feature a map of changes to land use that are within the project area. Proposed changes to land use are highlighted in gray or black, denoting changes driven by policy or other non-substantive land use policy changes. As you scroll down the story map, different communities will be highlighted and focused on, and each section will give you a small summary of land use changes that are occurring within the community. At any time, you can click on the search button and search for a specific parcel or address. So at random, I'm going to take Avenue. Take a random address. When you search your address, and it could be your home address or another address you're interested in, it will display a dot on the map. You still have to click an area to understand if there's been a change, but it'll kind of take you to that location. You can click on an area to understand if there's a change in an area. And it'll display areas that are not changing in green and tell you there's no change. Or if there are proposed changes, it will highlight it in kind of a dark orange and state the kind of change that's happening. So while you may be able to search for the address, you have to make sure that if you click on a change area, your parcel is within the bounded area to be able to understand if there's a change there. So while one section is focusing on land use, we have a similar section below that focuses on the zoning. And there, you follow the same process. You can scroll down to go to different communities. You can zoom in to identify specific areas, or you can enter an address and just check that go to that address specifically. There, the changes will be highlighted if there are any. Or left in green if they're the same. Those are the main portions of the story map. The story map near the end also includes some project links and a guide that is intended to help people understand the changes in the map. The guide itself is posted at the beginning of the story map, so you can always click the link to go to it, or it's in the beginning, or it's on the project page in the documents page underneath the link to the story map. If you can start the presentation again, I'll let you take control. And go to the next slide. So story map is intended to highlight parts of the area plan and proposed land use and zoning to aid in understanding changes that are proposed in the project. We're currently accepting comments as part of the public review period. And there's multiple ways that you can comment or submit comments to the project team. Please feel free to submit comments via our email address shown on your screen, or by calling 213-974-6316, or leaving a message on our Spanish channel, our Spanish number voice line at 213-974-6427. You can also set up a meeting with project staff on our project website, but in any case, comments are due by 5 p.m. on January 16th, 2023. With that, I'll hand it over to Tina for any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Rich, and the DUDAC team, as well as Tahira. So this concludes the presentation in terms of an overview of the plan, the ordinance, as well as the maps that will help implement the goals and policies in the plan. So now it's our Q&A session. I believe there is a button where you can use raise your hand. Under reactions, you should see a little icon at the bottom of the screen that says reactions, and then if you clicked it, you will see a raise hand button. So if you would like to ask a question verbally, you can do so. Or we also have the meeting chat box. So if you'd like to type in your question that way, we can also do that. So if you have any questions for staff or the DUDAC team, now is the time. So I see one hand by Clara. You can unmute yourself and go ahead and ask your question.
Yeah, so I had a question about the zoning, like the R1s changed into some strange code 9. And I was wondering why they're like 9. Does that mean that 9 units are allowed now because of the SB1? I mean, SB9?
So I don't know where specifically you're talking about, but I'm guessing you're talking about H9. Is that what you're asking about?
Yes, H9, and then there's
Okay.
one that's something 18, and
So H9 is actually not a zone. So in generally speaking, every lot actually has 2 things: zoning and also what we call general plan land use destination. So the general plan, which in this case is the metro area plan, the land use category, the H9, it's sort of how you know how many units are allowed. So the H9 example you have, for example, it means that you can have 9 units per acre. Okay, so that's density. That's what we call it, density. Usually H9 is actually single family areas with the matching zone R1. So that shouldn't be the change. Like if the zone today is R1, generally speaking, the land use should be H9 because the density 9 units per acre, when you do the math, because the zoning also have something called minimum lot size. So what it means is, you know, kind of like every lot in the single family area, this is sort of the smallest you can go in terms of the lot size. So when you do the math, 9 units per acre, it's actually like a single family area. The H18 that you mentioned is another land use category in the plan that allows up to 18 units per acre. So 18 units per acre, the matching zone is R2. So this is the area where we allow single family, but also duplexes. So those are the 2 regulations, I guess, that apply to every lot, basically. And that has nothing to do with the SB 9 that you mentioned. If you're talking about the H9 land use category. Separately, there is this law that is called SB 9, Senate Bill 9, that went into effect earlier this year. So that's a state law, which is a little different. That law does allow, that law actually allow single family lots to build another unit, another house basically on the lot. And that law is statewide. So every single city and county has to allow that if the property owner meets all the requirements in the law. So those are like two different things. I don't know if that's like clarify the
Yes,
confusion.
yeah, it does clarify some of the zoning questions I had on that, because I was just wondering what those numbers meant. So now I know it refers to the amount of units
Right.
per acre.
Yes. So yeah, that's why when you usually like do the math, then the single family area usually have the H9 up to 9 units per acre. So, okay. Let's see.
Tina, I saw
yes.
next there's a question in the chat.
Yes. Okay, so I do see a question in the chat, and then after that, I'll go back to Judy because I also see a hand by Judy. So Ryan in the chat box asked, how does the county do community outreach to bring awareness to residents of the MAP project? Pat, do you want to start with sort of like what we have done so far? Yeah.
Sure. So we started the process actually late last year, and we formed a community advisory committee made up of community leaders, local community leaders. So we met with those folks on a regular basis. We've had 7 meetings with them, giving them updates and getting their suggestions throughout the process, including engaging them to help us do outreach and bring awareness of the project. So that's one layer. The other thing that we did was this past summer, we actually held we held a series of virtual meetings, but we were also out in the community doing outreach events. We both DUDEC and county staff were out there helping to answer questions and doing some local workshops. So, and we considered this to be a continuation of our outreach. And we've also conducted we also been trying to promote through our department's social media sites and using our department website to post information and do email blasts. We do have a contact list of, I don't know how many people are on that list, but I know it's up over, it's maybe a few hundred. So we do email blasts on a regular basis to provide, somebody's giving me information, over 800 contacts on our email contact list. And we've been doing email blasts throughout the entire project period, giving people updates and letting them know what's happening.
Okay, thank you, Pat. And I'm also going to go ahead and put this link in the chat box. I believe we actually have on our project website, we do have a page dedicated to community outreach. So if you want to learn more, including past outreach events, you can visit that website. So the next person, Judy, you have your hand up. You can unmute yourself and ask your question.
Yes. I'm wondering, how do I get to that map that Rich was giving us the different areas and how we can click on to find out what our community is and if there's any changing? How do I get to that?
So Rich, do you want to go ahead and
yeah, the link
screen?
Oh, I can share my screen too.
Yeah, and maybe like walk Judy through where to find the link on our project website.
Sure. I'm going to share my screen. Okay, can you guys see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, the story map, which I believe Thomas as well was kind enough to post in the chat, can be found on our project website. So if you go to Metro Area Plan or planning.lacounty.gov/metroareaplan, there you can navigate to the Documents and Recordings tab.
Okay.
So I also put the link in the chat box, the
yeah.
project website.
Oh, great.
And
Thank
then,
you.
yeah, and then you can click that link and then it's the documents/recordings. That's where Rich is at.
And then scroll down a little bit and you'll see a heading for an interactive mapping application.
Yes.
And there you'll be greeted with 4 links. 2 of them are for the story map in English and Spanish, and the other 2 are for the story map guides, which kind of explain the story map.
Yes.
So I didn't share the screen, but the guide kind of goes over what I was referring to. But yeah, you should be able to see it there.
So the guide kind of tells you really quickly the little different icon. If you clicked on it, what does it show? So you can kind of use that to play around and navigate the story map.
Sure. I was just uncertain as to the link, but now you've posted it in the chat and I've copied it. Thank you so very much. I appreciate that, Tina.
Great.
And
Thank
Rich.
you. Thank you, Judy.
Thank you.
I also see another question in the chat box. The question is, under the M-0.5 zone, will biomedical use be limited in the type of biomedical research? And will food vendors be required to obtain a license with the permit? Tahira, I guess this is probably a question for you.
Sure. So with the biomedical uses, I do encourage you on our website under the documents tab as well that Rich was sharing to look at the draft ordinance that will explain, it will actually list out all of the uses that will be permitted within the M0.5 zone as well as the other new LSP zone. The uses as we have them, I don't think we really carve out much differences between types of biomedical uses. I think there's a couple of categories that relate to biomedical and then like research and development. So feel free to submit comments on that if you have specific comments that you want us to consider within those uses. The second question.
Oh, sorry. I just want to really quickly clarify. The biotechnical zone, it's the life science park.
Yes, thank you.
Right, because the M-0.5 is the other industrial zone.
The
that one is more
production.
about the artisan, handmade kind of manufacturing.
Right, correct. And so the 2 communities where we're mapping the life science park zone again is East Los Angeles and I believe it's Willowbrook, and that's because of the proximity of some of the medical facilities there. So it made sense to map in those communities as opposed to some of the other communities. And then what was the second part of the question? I'm sorry.
The second question has to do with food vendors. And I think that has to do with the mobile food vending idea from the plan.
So yeah, I think that was related to the big plan, one of the plan ideas. So mobile food vending, currently the licensing that's required, that comes from the state and public health. So we would not put any regulation as far as licensing, but as public health is one of our partner agencies that would help implement any programs, they would be in charge of, determining what licenses are required for that. But I do believe that there are currently licenses that are required for food vending.
And I also would like to add that the mobile food vending is one of the big ideas from the plan. But in order to sort of like a phase two of this project, if you will, is we also will start another ordinance to basically add more regulations in the zoning code regarding allowing this kind of food trucks on private lots. So currently it's not in the draft ordinance, but we are researching and looking at whether we can in the future allow food trucks, for example, on parking lot or on vacant lot. And so that is more about whether we allow it on the private property. But in terms of the actual licensing, with regards to like the health, for example, that is what Tahir was saying. That comes from the state as well as public health department. But again, the ordinance we are presenting right now, currently we don't allow mobile food vending on private lot. That is more like in the future, we'll have another project that focus on how to regulate those if we want to allow them on private lots. So that's that. So I also see more questions in the chat box. So this one is from Connie. Her question is, how many of the committee members that were involved in the meeting would you say live in the community versus work in the community? So Pat, I'm not too sure if we have any statistics on people who live versus people who work in the metro communities.
We didn't keep those statistics in terms of the people who showed up to our in-person or virtual meetings. However, I know that the Community Advisory Committee, they are all people who live in the communities that they were advising on.
And Connie also has a follow-up question, which is how are the residents that live in these communities have been invited to be part of these discussions?
Yeah, we've been trying to do our best to work with some of our local partners. I actually recently had a meeting with Communities for a Better Environment. I know they help to promote. We again use those existing email contact lists to do email blasts to engage with the residents. So those are people who've engaged with our department over the years. And we've worked with the local organizations that we're aware of and our Community Advisory Committee members. We've also asked for their help to promote the events. And yeah, so of course, social media is, for some people, they're actually following us. We would love it if you guys could follow us on social media, because that is a way that we're also using to promote and encourage people to attend these kind of meetings and discussions.
Thank you, Pat. So then I also see another question from Dorothy. Her question is, how does the mobility element fit into the metro area plan? Safe connective networks for vulnerable road users are often overlooked. These area plans seem like a great opportunity for improving safe connectivity options. I don't know if this is more a question for Judah or Pat. So this is about the mobility element in the plan and how does it help. And I also wonder if the Florence Firestone TOD, which is a separate project, but it's going to be adopted soon. I'm not too sure if public works play a big role in addressing connectivity issue.
Right. So I think there's a number of different types of efforts the county is going through to, so we do have a mobility section in this area plan where we have policies to encourage connectivity. So connectivity, there's the trains, right? And also pedestrian connectivity, bicycling connectivity. So there are ongoing projects that Public Works is involved in, and we do have policies in the plan that you should take a look at and comment on in the plan. So we do have supporting policies. But if you feel like we're lacking, please, tell us. But we do have something in there. And again, there are things that Public Works is currently doing. If you receive our email blast through this newsletter, we actually recently promoted some draft pedestrian plans that our partners, Public Health and Public Works, are currently drafting. So those get really specific with regards to pedestrian pathways in these communities.
Thank you, Pat. And then in the chat box, I also see a few questions from Clara. So the first question is, are there limits on number of trucks stands one person can have? We hear of one person owning 7 trucks. So I guess you're referring to the food trucks. So in this ordinance, no, because in this ordinance, we are not even including anything with regards to allowing food trucks on private lots just yet. Like I said, the first step is to have this as a big idea in the plan. So the policy, their policy to sort of support this type of small businesses. But the next step is we actually need to figure out where we want to allow them. And if we allow them, what kind of regulations do we have? So that will be a separate project in the near future when we actually work on a zoning code ordinance. So that is the first question from Clara. I think the second question has to do with what is the relationship between the metro area plan and the 3rd Street specific plan in East LA. So I can help answer this question. The East LA 3rd Street specific plan is still going to be in the zoning code. The majority of what's in that specific plan are not being changed because we are not working on updating that specific plan. However, like what Tahir was saying earlier, there are some regulations that apply to all 7 metro area plan communities. So in those situations, those regulations will also apply to areas that are currently covered by the East LA 3rd Street plan. For example, one idea, like we mentioned, is the accessory commercial units. So we want to allow accessory commercial units throughout the metro planning area, on corner lots, in residential areas. And so we want to make sure that within the East LA 3rd Street, the corner lots in residential areas are also subject to these same rules, that they can have these same uses, but in doing so, they also have to follow the same development standards and performance standards and hours of operation, things like that. But in terms of the actual East LA specific plan itself, that is not being updated at this point. The last question from Clara is, how many units were created during the last housing element? Were the goals met in terms of extremely low, very low, low, and moderate income units? So I can kind of answer this question in general. I don't actually remember how many units were created, but housing element, for those who are not familiar with, it's a long-range housing policy document required by state law. And the state requires us to have this plan updated every 8 years or so. The state doesn't require the county or any cities to actually build the housing, but they want to make sure we have enough land to allow those units to be built if the private market wants to build those units. If I remember correctly, I think in the last housing element cycle, so that was between 2014 through 2021, within those years, I would say only about a quarter of the housing needs that the state told us, well, you have to plan for these units, you have to allow these units to be built. Only about a quarter of those actually got built. And this is for the entire unincorporated county. So it's not just the metro area, it's not just East LA, it's just overall the unincorporated county. Only about a quarter of them are being built. And obviously some of them are affordable housing units, depending on whether the project, asks for things like density bonus, and under state law, they are required to provide affordable housing units. So I don't have those units, or numbers in my mind, but I can tell you, usually only a quarter of those units that we were asked to plan for actually got constructed by developers. So then let's see, one more question I see in the chat box. Can you talk more about county plans for retaining legacy businesses in community plan area? I guess I will start by saying that I think some of the components that Tahira shared in the ordinance is trying to do that. Like if there's an existing, let's say, commercial neighborhood serving retail market, in this neighborhood for 40 years. And even though the zoning has changed over time and it's now a residential area, you know, and usually we call them non-conforming. And usually, like what Tahira is saying, a non-conforming use, meaning that it no longer meets today's zoning regulations because it's a residential zone. So usually if they want to continue, they have to go through the public hearing. And when the term of that permit expired, they have to go back to the public hearing again. And so I think at least as part of the ordinance, what we're trying to do is, if some of these businesses have been around for decades and they are really serving the neighborhood, and they are not selling alcohol, kind of like what Tahira was mentioning, can we make it easier for those businesses to stay? And I think that's part of what we're trying to do with the ordinance, so that we don't need to require these businesses to go through the hearing process again, which usually means more time and money. And we understand that these are small businesses. And so in that case, I would say that's one way to help them stay in the neighborhood, to make the process easier and cheaper and faster. I don't know if Pat or Tahira, you have more to add about that. Retaining legacy businesses, or did I kind of cover it?
I think that that's part of one of our implementation programs. And so I think I would defer to DUDEC to be able to talk about it if they want to talk about the details, but it is part of something that we're going to investigate implementing. So please take a look at, it's in chapter 5. Please take a look at that and provide us with your comments on that.
Okay, so then I see another question from Ryan in the chat box. Let's see. I actually don't know what company is that. I don't know if Ryan, you want to unmute yourself and maybe explain a little bit. I do see that you mentioned this company, they sanitize medical supplies. So you're asking if this kind of businesses are allowed in the life science park zone. Sanitation of medical supplies. So Tahira, can you remember? Oh, hi, Ryan.
Hi, yeah, it's a company that uses a gas to clean the medical supplies. So I think some of the, I guess it would be good to have some examples of specific companies, because it's kind of vague when, as far as the reference to the businesses that are allowed in these certain places. So that's why I was just asking about a particular business, if it would be allowed in that life science park area.
So I think we would need more detail about the company, and then we would need to look at the specifics of the uses permitted in the zone. But again, this is the opportunity, if you have either concerns or just ideas about how those types of uses should be permitted, then definitely submit that as comments to us regarding the ordinance. We do have, for a lot of the uses related to either like medical research, biomedical, they would require a conditional use permit in these zones. So even though the zone is intended to allow for such uses, the ones that are seen as more impactful or may have some hazards or things like that, those would require stricter review through a conditional use permit. So again, requires public hearing, requires more review to make sure the use is compatible, to make sure anything that's impactful can be mitigated and things like that.
Okay, thank you. So the determination would be made with like a public meeting between the public and the county, or how would that work?
So there will be a public hearing for this project, which we are looking at the end of April, late April. That's why we're asking, for example, if you actually, have concern and you want us to be very specific about not allowing certain businesses in the life science park, for example, because of the use of the gas that you mentioned to sanitize. You can go ahead and send us an email, actually, and we can definitely incorporate or look into your comments so that we will try to address it before the public hearing begins in April. Again, I don't know if we can go to the slide where it has our email addresses. so people can write down our email addresses if they want to email us their comments and feedback. Let's see. So Clara
thank you.
also in the chat box have questions / comment about ACU. I think her concern is people's access to affordable food, because some of these areas are food deserts and that they need nearby affordable markets. And so she's wondering if ACU is going to be sort of a way to provide healthy food at affordable prices. Clara, I think that is exactly the intent of the ACU, is to...
You misinterpreted my question altogether. Sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. Let me read it again. So it's Clara's question is / comment. People need more affordable food. I'm afraid that ACU units is not going to provide healthy food at affordable prices. These ACUs seem like a false idea. Areas that are food deserts need nearby affordable markets. I would say that is the intent of the ACU. That is kind of why we want to allow ACU on certain lots within residential areas, noting that some of these neighborhoods really lack, say, markets to sell healthy food, which is kind of the idea behind it. But do you have any idea, for example?
Yeah, because we have mom and pop stores, little ones, and they're not affordable. They provide little sodas and things like that aren't at affordable prices. Markets are much more affordable. That's what we need. We don't need these little ACUs. We already have some of them.
So can I speak to that, Tina?
Yes, sure.
Okay, so I think this is actually based on comments we received from the Community Advisory Committee. Our Life Science Park, even though the larger idea is to encourage like bioscience facilities, it actually also allows grocery stores and markets, because they wanted that zoning to be flexible to not only generate, employment opportunities, but also serve local community needs. So even though I know the name of the zone sounds like, oh, Life Science Park, but it actually will allow for grocery stores and markets that will serve the employees and the local residents. And this is based on conversations we've had with the Community Advisory Committee.
And is that only the LSP park? I'm trying to remember. Would it also be the M-.5?
I don't know. I don't know about M-0.5, but I know for Life Science Park, we do allow for it.
So in addition to the ACU idea, another thing is there's also yet another zone to allow more neighborhood serving commercial uses, including grocery stores. That's the answer.
Yes.
Okay.
It does include, grocery stores are included in M0.5 as well.
Okay, so both new zones also allow grocery stores as well.
Thanks, Rich.
Okay, thank you, Rich. Okay, let's see. More questions in the chat box. So this one is about environmental justice. Can you talk more about how you are going to address environmental justice needs? That includes cleaner air, access to resources, including fresh food. I believe we have some policies in the plan that address.
We
EJD.
do. We actually have a section of, I think, chapter 3 of the area plan that talks about environmental justice. I don't remember the policies off the top of my head, but I know we actually do have a section with policy that supports that. But I would say that when we created the Life Science Park zone and also the M-0.5 zone, it's to take more intensive industrial zoning and turn it into a cleaner industrial use. So we are hoping that will help address some of the environmental justice concerns that have been brought up in the past. And again, in terms of access to resources, the other thing that we are gonna, in very preliminary exploratory stages, that big idea of the freeway cap park. If we are able to bring the resources to build the freeway cap parks, those will be like, green space that will go over, some of the freeways, and that could help. Well, there's some studies out there that says that, plants help absorb pollution. So I think that's something that the freeway parks will cover. And also, I believe, and maybe Tahira or Rich can answer this, we are trying to encourage more private development to have required open space. Because right now in the past, our code only required open space when they're developing on large, huge, like subdivisions, like way out there in like Santa Clarita Valley or Antelope Valley. And so one of the things our department has been trying to do is with the smaller developments that are in our urban areas, we're now trying to require them to also build in the green space, open space landscaping. So I don't know if Tahira, you might want to speak to that.
Yeah, that's correct. In the LSP and M0.5 zones, we do have minimum open space requirement. And then for all of the other zones, we also have added just additional landscaping requirements to include, drought tolerant, native or non-invasive species plants to increase the green space and the environmental kind of aesthetic of the communities.
And I'll also add that this is not part of the metro area plan, but just so you know, our partnering agency, Parks and Recreation, they are also currently studying the feasibility of establishing a new park impact fee, because kind of like what Pat mentioned earlier, currently, usually if it's only like a big subdivision project, that they are required to, provide the open space, but also pay a park fee. But, that is not really relevant in our geographic area. You're not going to see a lot of big subdivision projects. So Parks and Recreation is trying to study the feasibility right now to see if they can establish a new park impact fee, even for smaller infill housing projects. So that the idea is, hey, if you're going to put more residents in this area, you have this need. And then some of these communities are, lacking the green spaces and the parks. So that's the idea behind it. And they're studying that fee right now. Okay, so I'm going to go back to the chat box. There's another question from Dorothy. Does this area plan include school and or park zone destination, or would this be covered in a CSD? So I feel like we kind of touch upon this a little bit about the park situation. We don't require a park. That's more like the Parks and Rec, which is a separate department. And like I said, they are looking into requiring an additional fee, paid by developer down the road. That's one thing. Meanwhile, in our zoning code, we are not requiring a park, but for developments like, the life science park that Tahira mentioned earlier, we have sort of like a built-in development standard to require enough sort of green spaces, landscaping, tree planting on those lots. So that's one. For school, I think, Tahira, what we have regarding school in the ordinance is more about addressing some feedback we received from community members about how some of the schools in our current code, we don't really have any development standards or regulations when it comes to school, really. So I think what we're adding in the ordinance is a conditional use permit requirement, so that school is subject to the public hearing process. I don't know if Tahira or Pat, anyone else, if you have anything to add about schools.
Yeah, so for the schools, it's the conditional use permit, but also some development standards to try to help with the traffic flow. So trying to make sure that that traffic is kind of confined to within the school site, because we heard from some community members that it becomes unsafe around the school facilities when cars are backed up and children are loading or unloading from cars and being picked up from school. So we're trying to figure out ways that makes it a little bit safer within those areas.
Thank you, Tahira. And then I see another question from Clara. This is about if the plan or the ordinance has anything addressing anti-displacement and gentrification. I think the concern is that some of the new uses allowed in some of these new zones could potentially be, gentrify the neighborhood. For example, in her message, the artisans, their art galleries have been associated with gentrification, life science corridor with markets for employees. And so her question is, how are we addressing anti-displacement? So I'll try to answer your question. In general, I would say there are larger county efforts to address anti-displacement and gentrification. Some of these are outside of this project, but it's happening concurrently. So for example, Department of, DCB, I kept forgetting what they are called.
Department of Consumer and Business Affairs.
Thank you. Department of Consumption and Business Affairs.
Consumer.
Department of Consumer and Business Affairs. They recently started another effort addressing, it's called Tenant Opportunity to Purchase Ordinance. That's what it is. And the idea behind it is, I'm gonna look it up really quickly so I don't misspeak because I'm not the subject matter expert. This is about preventing renter displacement by providing tenants or tenant groups or community land trusts to have the first right to purchase single-family homes or multifamily properties when offered for sale. So they literally just kickstart their process, I want to say last month. So they're looking into that. That is in response to a board direction last year to try to see if the county can create a framework for an ordinance, for administrative and supportive policies, community engagement plan, and also identify cost and funding sources to help implement this idea, to help the tenants stay, to have the first right to purchase those properties. So that's one thing that's happening sort of concurrently within the county. And then another thing that another county department or agency has been working on, or they just finished recently, I think it's the Los Angeles County Development Authority. They recently created a mapping tool. The mapping tool is focusing on risk of displacement and gentrification, and they are using that mapping tool to help them prioritize funding, where the community or area that has the highest risk. That's how they are using that tool right now to try to distribute, I guess, financial resources. So this plan, I would say it's in that sense, it's not like a standalone thing. It's supposed to work with these other county efforts that are pending. I don't know if that kind of addressed your question. In the zoning code itself, we deal more with, I usually say, the hardware. So the county code already has something called Affordable Housing Preservation Ordinance. And the idea behind that is to make sure that if a new development comes in, but you do have tenants occupying some of these affordable units, we want to make sure that the new development is going to replace the affordable units. so that there will never, there will be always a no net loss, if you will. So that is what the zoning code is already doing, is to make sure new developments still replace any affordable units that are there, even though they come in to propose something new. So, and all these efforts are supposed to work together. So I hope I can answer your question there. Dorothy, I'm not too sure which tool you're talking about, the link for that tool. Dorothy, if you want to unmute yourself, your question is, are you talking about the mapping tool I mentioned that the development authority is using, another department?
Yes.
I am not too sure if that mapping tool is a public tool for like the public at this point. I know that eventually they are thinking to have like a public version. I do need to double check because that's another department. If we have your contact, we can follow up with you. So that do we have your email contact? I feel like we probably do. Are you on our email list, Dorothy?
Yes, I'm on the email list.
Okay, all right. Maybe send us an email
Okay, I will.
so we know to, yeah. But
Thank
we
you.
can double check for you. Okay, let's see what else. I think Rich, did you just put in an additional?
Yeah, I didn't want to derail the message. Earlier there was or the conversation, but earlier when there was a question about including park zone designations, there are some changes to zoning, but they're essentially just updating existing zoning from R2 or R3 to the open space designation where there are currently parks mapped. So if you look at places like Willowbrook, you'll see examples of that, but it's not additional parkland which
So
is
the park is already there. We just want to make sure the
Yes.
zoning is calling it open space.
yes
Instead of something else, so that later on it becomes something else.
yes.
Okay. Let's see. What else do we? Did I miss, or do we have more questions? Oh, okay. I see. I guess Clara. Let's see. A way that intergeneration wealth has been passed on has been through property. This was long denied to people of color. Also, mom and pop landlords have raised rents more slowly. But now Prop 19 will force current landlord heirs to sell their properties because the taxes will be unaffordable. So this is going to mean a lot of properties are going to go to developers and large rental companies who will raise rents. I guess the only thing I can say, because you're right, I mean, some of these regarding property tax, it's totally out of the scope of this project or what the planning department can do. That is very true. But I think I'm not too sure if you know that the county does have a rent control ordinance in place. I feel like it was maybe a couple of years ago that it went into effect. And again, we are not the agency administering that program. Is DCBA, Department of Consumer and Business Affairs. I got it right this time. So the county has been doing something regarding rent control. But I hear you, and I agree that there perhaps need to be some reform regarding property tax. But that is out of the scope of this project, and it's out of sort of what this project can do.
I do want to mention that the county recently created a new department called the Department of Economic Opportunity, and you should Google it. I do think they are trying to really connect people to job opportunities and to try to help people in a lot of different ways, and looking at economic development, not just for the large private companies, but what we can do to support existing residents. There are a lot of county departments that are trying to do different things, and we're kind of part of a larger group of county departments, trying to do their part. But I would really encourage you, thank you for your comments. We are seeing all of these, we're recording this video. These are comments that we'll take into consideration and see what else we can do through our effort, and also pass along any comments to our sister agencies. I would encourage you again, there's also an actual program. I was like flipping through a hard copy of our draft document, and there is a local business retention program as well, where we're trying to retain like local businesses that have been there for a long time, so they don't get gentrified out, hopefully. So please continue to engage with us. I think we also created a bookings page. So Rich, if you could pull that up. So in addition to sending us emails, making phone calls, Rich Marshalian on our team created a link on back to our project website, where you can actually, this is actually on the first page, I think, of the project site, right? And they can click on that button, the orange button.
Yeah, it's on the first page and on the stay updated page. It's a little button. You'll notice that as you scroll down, it'll start hovering and inviting you to click on it. And once you click on it, you can select the time to meet with any one of the project planners on an individual basis, ask any questions. There's some few questions we have of you before we meet, so we can kind of be more prepared. But if you don't want to do that, that's optional. And you could meet me this and ask questions and provide comments, whatever is easiest for you.
Yeah. So please take a look at our draft documents and let us know if what comments you have on what we've written so far and put together. It's still a draft document. We can still make changes. Thank you for being here tonight. It's now 7:37, so I think hopefully we've given you enough to chew on and for you to comment on our document. So thank you for being here, and I'll turn it back to Danielle and DUDEC team.
Thanks, Pat. Just as she mentioned, thanks everyone for taking the time to meet with us tonight. We know everyone's busy with the holidays coming up, so we really appreciate you listening to our presentation, and thanks so much for these comments. And just a reminder to check out the documents online and submit your comments by January 16th. And with that, I will go ahead and stop the recording and end the meeting.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good night.